Tomorrow's Batman Day, and some of you guys might not know this, but Batman is my favorite fictional character of all time. And while at first glance, he's just a guy that beats up people while dressed up as a giant rodent, I really resonate with his themes and his character. He's a guy that went through a horrific tragedy and uses pain to ensure that such tragedies would never be, inflicted onto anyone else. He's someone that took his own personal trauma and made an excuse to help his fellow man. He's a true hero. But unfortunately, in the Versus community, he's just known as a prep time merchant. And I mean, it's pretty funny. The idea that Batman can beat up anyone with prep time is something that, while at first glance is hilarious, it might have at least some type of legitimacy behind it. As I want to illustrate this by putting Batman up against the king of the monsters himself, Godzilla. So join me today as we're going to be covering various versions of the king of monsters and compare them to comic Batman's feats and accolades to see if he has what it takes to take down these various versions of the king. And hey, if you want to see where Batman with prep time unironically scales for the most part, this is also a great video for you. I'm putting him up against Godzilla after all. It's safe to say that all chips are in for this one. But before that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and at this particular moment in time, we got around 93K. Thank you guys for the support on last week's video. It was an unexpected banger, and I hope this one's a banger as well. So be sure to let me know what type of topics you want to see in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for the support. But with that being said, let's get into the topic that you clicked the video to find out. Before we talk about Batman's prep capabilities, I think it's fitting that we talk about his base and what he can do normally, as I think Batman's scaling is just all over the place, and I think I've broken it down, and I want to thank Viper in advance for helping me out with some of these scans. So many people think that Batman is this peak human specimen and that he's like a wall to street level character, but he has way higher feats than that, as he's able to endure building level explosions. He's able to survive falling from space itself, which is another building level showing. He's able to break free of Mr. Freeze's ice constructs, which can encase entire city blocks and districts. Against Deathstroke, he's able to endure a school encompassing explosion, which comes out to around city block. And I was able to also find an instance in which he was able to endure a multi-city block level explosion. This thing is so massive that it's, reaching up into those town level ranges. So it's safe to say that Batman is a building to possibly town level character. You could argue that the higher ends are consistent, as he scales to Solomon Grundy, a character who somewhat downscales from mid-tier Justice League members. And speaking of Batman and his scaling to Justice League members, he also is comparable to the Karate Kid, whose punches can output city block level shockwaves and such. So while I'm not advocating for Batman to just be this outer-versal character like some people like to claim by using outliers and stuff, I think that realistically, you can make a pretty good case for Batman being a more urban character, probably capping in base realistically more consistently in those town level ranges. And as for his speed, it's pretty much all over the place. He can dodge bullets, lightning, freeze guns, lasers. But I think realistically, while you can't scale his AP to other Justice League members, Batman, as a prominent member of the team, would at least sort of downscale from sort of the casual MFTL plus feats that all of these characters have performed, whether that's just scaling to one another and, dodging their attacks. Batman has to be in the same ballpark in perceptions and reactions as someone like Superman in order to really compete and just be a relevant member to whatever they're going up against. And no, I'm not saying Batman is fast enough to travel through time and galaxies in seconds, but I mean, to be honest, I don't want to sound like that guy, but he just might be able to have comparable reaction time just due to the amount of characters whose blows he's dodging and weaving. Sort of base Batman covered for the most part. Let's get into the Godzillas that he handles with pretty much little to no prep. So off the bat, the following Godzillas are going to be versions of the kaiju that Batman wouldn't really sweat too hard or really just need to lock in terms of his prep, as he shares comparable stats to them in his base form. As at the moment, you've got Shin Godzilla, Godzilla -1, and Godzilla 98. And these are characters I've scaled here on the channel, and they really much are in that city block to town level range in terms of their physicals as well. A lot of these characters have feats that would get to that level, as well as durability showings that are consistent with that fact. And in some of these instances, some of these guys actually have anti-feats that get them much lower than that, if you kind of really want to play that game. So seeing as how Batman is a city block to town level character with just his hands and his suit, I don't really doubt that he could just hop on the Batwing and just shoot these guys down. Once again, we're giving him prep on top of this, so he should know about Shin and -1's atomic breath capabilities, so he probably wouldn't blindly do that to them. But as for Zilla, he's got real no answer to that. But as for Shin and -1, this is where the prep would come in, as Batman has ways to subdue both of these versions of the character, as Batman has responses to reactive evolution, as well as a super high regeneration factor, as he deals with Clayface on the regular, and he's no stranger to using Mr. Freeze's freeze tech type of weapons to slow down the processes of whether that's, reactive evolution or just high regen. And on top of the fact that Batman's weapons should be potent enough to just blow any of these guys' heads off, I don't really think that regen is going to be that big a factor at the end of the day. Batman's just going to have things that would put them down, as I still believe all of his missiles should be comparable in at least knocking these guys out, or even critically damaging them in Shin Godzilla's case. So at that point, the freeze tech that I'm proposing a Batman would put on his weapons would really just be the thing that puts these guys in the coffin. But frankly, not every Godzilla is that weak, so let's really try to find an average between the cinematic versions of the character, and then we can dive into some of Batman's preparation and tactician, capabilities to really dive into the meat and heart of this question of, could Batman deal with Godzilla with prep? So consider this part of the video kind of just an appetizer. The main Godzilla that I'm going to be going over for this section of the video is Showa Godzilla, because I think he represents a little bit of everything. You want the city level stuff, he's got that. He's got the island level stuff, and he's got the higher end cosmic stuff, right? And to make him even more appropriate, this was a Godzilla that was actually going to originally meet Batman. So, for those of you guys who don't know, Batman from the 60s show was originally going to have a crossover with Showa Godzilla. So, let's just make it appropriate. But starting off with lower end, Showa Godzilla is stated to be stronger than the original Godzilla, whose power is likened to a nuclear bomb on several occasions, which is consistent with the fact that as a part of his origin story, he just no-sold one straight to the face, but for even higher and much more impressive ends. During his third appearance in a battle with King Kong at the end of the movie, the two are able to cause a violent earthquake that is stated to have shook the entire Japanese archipelago, which when calculated would be a multi-continental feat. Once again, we're just getting higher and higher. By his fourth appearance, Godzilla is boxing with King Ghidorah, a character who is just a planet destroyer. It's stated in many guides. It's imperative to the narrative of Ghidorah, three-headed monster, that this guy is a planetary threat. And even if you want to argue that he's a surface wiper, due to the manner of time in which he performed this feat, being a blink of an eye, a second, manner of instance, pretty much, a lot of things just implied to be a one-shot attack. And then stacking that on top of the fact that his gravity beams destroy matter on a subatomic level, and his mere surface wipe of Venus would be a dwarf star level feat. And you might be asking yourself, how do we know that he uses gravity beams to perform this feat? Because in Zone Fighter, we see the planet and it's scorched and there's smoke and stuff. So the only thing in Ghidorah's kit that could actually do that, or produce smoke, is his gravity beams. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. But on top of that, for more consistency, by the time of Zone Fighter, Ghidorah is just stated to be the greatest weapon at the disposal of the Garrigo aliens, which have planet-busting nukes that can destroy gas giants to a large star-level yield. And once again, this is a Ghidorah that Godzilla is consistently pressing and getting the better of. Speaking of Zone Fighter, this is the show in which Showa Godzilla gets his best feats, as he scales to Zone Fighter, a character who in himself can defeat kaiju that are fourth dimensional in nature, that have the ability to raise the dimensionality of the universe by the fourth dimension. And Zone Fighter can destroy these constructs as well as these kaiju, and Godzilla is stronger than Zone Fighter arguably in the show, and Godzilla will go on the train to get even more powerful than that. So anywhere you want to scale him, whether it's city to even possibly even Universal Plus, Showa Godzilla has whatever scaling you like. This sentiment is also consistent with his speed, as even as early as raids again, this guy is dodging or reacting to Anguirus, who in himself can react to Godzilla's Sharenko radiation-based atomic breath, which would mean that, these guys possess relativistic reaction times. Godzilla consistently throughout the show era is dodging beams of light, lasers, and stuff that is equated to as such. But the best stuff you're really going to find is stuff that once again comes from the Ghidorah, as that's a guy who can travel across galaxies in seconds, if not just minutes, at a low ball. And Godzilla scales to characters who can react to Ghidorah, as well as keep pace with him while in his flight mode speed in outer space. so Godzilla at best from the Showa continuity, who possess MFTL plus combat speeds and reaction time. Safe to say this Godzilla is pretty stacked. He's not the strongest, obviously, but he's like one of, probably top 5. So I think that going over Batman's prep in regards to a threat like Showa Godzilla would pretty much answer how he would stack up against pretty much most Godzillas. And we'll even touch on some of the stronger guys during Batman's section, so just look forward to that. Realistically, when talking about a giant monster and what Batman would do in terms of his prep, I think in character, he's just going to call it Justice League. Like, in character, I think Batman sees a giant monster. He's like, all right, Superman, you handle that. But that's kind of a cop-out, and I'm aware of that. So I'm going to try to ignore their existence for the most part. I'm going to try to keep this section limited to Batman's prep, what he has on deck, what's in his cave, or stuff that he could potentially do. And the first thing that I want to talk about is he has BFRB via his Phantom Zone gun. And that gun does pretty much exactly what you think it would do. It just BFRBs Godzilla to the Phantom Zone, a boundless dimension outside of the regular DC cosmology, or in a different level of existence. That's probably one way he can get rid of Godzilla. But moving on to much more interesting ways, let's talk about his various mechs and suits of armor. And with that being said, I want to move on to the gigantic Bat Mechazord that he made in response to the MV Titans crossing over to the DC Universe. Now, I know this isn't the canon DC Universe, but seeing as how this is some random Batman on some random Earth, I think that Prime Batman will be more than capable of replicating this suit. So let's actually scale the Batmech that we see in this comic book run. Obviously, the Superman and the Godzilla in this series are featless, as they're random versions that are merely adjacent to their Prime iterations. But with that being said, the author of the story has implied that his DC universe and the characters in it are just as capable as the Prime versions. So you could just argue that this Superman would be as strong as Injustice Superman, who I've also scaled in the channel. That guy can push planets around. He's able to box with Darkseid. But at best, Injustice Superman is actually the same Superman from MK versus DC. And that's, again, where Superman was able to box with a Darkseid Shao Kahn amalgamation that was threatening to merge both universes. So it's safe to say that Batman made this mech to be able to deal with Titans that could press with Superman, who could box with Universal plus level characters. So that's potentially one way Batman could handle Godzilla. But you can't talk about suits that augment Batman's physical stats without talking about the Hellbat armor set. With this armor, he was able to box with Darkseid long enough to just injure him and to escape alive. I know that doesn't sound too impressive on paper, but considering Darkseid's a platonic concept and is pretty consistently shown to be a Justice League level threat, the fact that Batman could swap hands with him at all is very, very impressive. So if Batman puts this suit on, I think Showa is wraps for Showa Godzilla, as well as Heisei Godzilla on top of that. Now, this suit comes with the con that it actually siphons Batman's life. So if he's in it long enough, he's just gonna die. But seeing as how he's boxing with arguably outer versatile characters, he wouldn't really need to be in the suit for that long to dispose of most versions of Godzilla. And don't you think for a second that Batman is limited to fighting with Godzilla, as he doesn't have to actually box him in an Iron Man-esque suit, as during the Final Crisis event, he was able to make a platonic bullet that could just shoot Darkseid's true form. That's a bullet that's gonna kill pretty much all Godzillas right there. But moving on to more funny ways Batman could deal with Godzilla, we have things that he could theoretically do. I don't think he's gonna do any of these things in character, but it wouldn't be impossible for Batman to do this with prep. For starters, Batman is consistently shown to be an intellectual superior to the Joker, a character who could trick Mr. Mixie Pixelic into giving him his power. So if Batman wanted to, he could just trick Mr. Mixie into giving him his power, seeing as how he's smarter than the Joker. And don't even get me started if you ignore Batman's moral code, right? As we have characters known as the Darkest Knight who are pretty much Batman with prep with no morals. And we see how he eventually became this multiversal threat. So yeah, Batman in character has many ways to deal with Godzilla, whether that's just calling the Justice League, using suits that he has on deck, creating suits, creating platonic bullets, BFRBing him out of the arena, or even stealing the powers of gods to get whatever he wants done. So yeah, moral of the story, do not give Batman prep time. You're just asking to get washed at that point. So yeah, that should hopefully answer the video's question, but don't leave just yet. As I hinted to earlier, I have a special announcement that I'm gonna make right now.
Flashback.
My new video is doing great. I think I'm gonna take this week off and try to catch up on some of my schoolwork, as well as get ahead of some of my editing. No, that's a great idea, Chronic. You can take the week off.
Yeah,
and as you can see, a lot of people are talking about it. Hey, look, it even made its way to Twitter. Oh, and it seems that the tweet is blowing up. I think you want to look at this one. Well, I suppose a peek couldn't hurt. I love to see some blind praise towards myself.
I heard you're getting canceled by Twitter.
Yeah, they're really just making me look like some type of clown. Now look, I'm crazy enough to go against Godzilla and Dragon Ball fans, but Twitter? No, thank you. Obviously, no hate to any of these guys. I just thought that the discourse from my video was funny. To Twitter, I genuinely apologize. I made a severe collapse in my judgment, and I should not have put Superman up against Judge Holden. I apologize, Twitter. Please don't stop making fun of me. But on a serious note, the video banged, and I'm glad that a lot of you guys loved it, right? I'm sorry I couldn't get a video out on Friday. We're working heavily to get a video out next week. So this is kind of like the short, I guess. This is just a random update. I just thought that the whole situation was funny. I wanted to put a meme in front of it. But while we're here, since we're getting closer to 100,000 subscribers, I just want to announce that my celebration video will be a remake of my initial video. Kind of a spiritual successor, I guess. As I'm going to be going over video game Mario and video game Sonic to see who between the both of them would win the fight. I want this to be a massive video, and it's going to be a celebration of the channel as a whole. So thank you guys for the support. And why not drop a good piece of news while discussing some I don't really know what to call this, but once again, but Twitter, my bad. What happened again? But as always, I'll see the rest of you guys next week with another video. But as always, stay big G fans.